Of course, Republicans are still fighting very, very hard to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And one way that they're doing it is picking apart the language within the law. Now, today, there was a little bit of a roller coaster ride when it came to the issue of the Affordable Care Act. First, there was the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals that ruled that a certain portion of Obamacare should be struck down. And what were they specifically looking at? Well, according to the Associated Press, it all revolves around 4 words in the 900-page law, which says tax credits to help pay premiums are available to people who enroll through an exchange established by the state. Now, that very last part is what Republicans are kind of holding on to, because they're saying, hey, look. There are 36 states right now that have not set up their own exchange or their own exchange program. And as a result, they're relying on the federal exchange. And hey, the 900-page law doesn't say anything about a federal exchange. So the three-judge panel voted that, you know what, yeah, we're going to have to strike Obamacare down, or this specific portion of Obamacare down, because the law isn't specific enough. So let me tell you exactly how this went down. The first judge to make this case was Judge Thomas B. Griffith. Now, I should note that this was a judge that was appointed by George Bush, and here's what he had to say. We conclude that appellants have the better of the argument. A federal exchange is not an exchange established by the state, and Section 36B does not authorize the IRS to provide tax credits for insurance purchased on federal exchanges. The second judge to agree with him, Judge A. Raymond Randolph, and he was appointed by Bush Sr., and here's what he had to say. Only further legislation could accomplish the expansion the government seeks. And he also continues to say, we reach this conclusion, frankly, with reluctance, at least until states that wish to can set up exchanges. Our ruling will likely have significant consequences, both for the millions of individuals receiving tax credits through federal exchanges and for health insurance markets more broadly. But high as those stakes are, the principle of legislative supremacy that guides us is higher still. Now, those two judges obviously agreed that this part of the Affordable Care Act should be struck down. However, there was a dissenting judge, and that judge was Judge Harry T. Edwards, and here's what he had to say. This case is about appellants' not-so-veiled attempt to gut the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. He continues to say the majority's reading of the statute amounts to a poison pill to the insurance markets in the states that did not elect to create their own exchanges. This surely is not what Congress intended. Now, let me tell you what the ramifications of this would be had it not been for the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that decided, no, the lower court is wrong, and we are going to say that we're going to uphold this portion of the Affordable Care Act. Now, keep in mind that of the 5.4 million people that have enrolled for the Affordable Care Act, 87%, or 4.7 million, received premium tax credits. Now, these tax credits are extremely important. The reason why they're important is because the individuals who get those tax credits can't afford the insurance on their own. They need the tax credits in order to afford the premiums, right? So to give you some more information on that, 7.3 million would be receiving subsidies through healthcare.gov by 2016. So obviously, many people in the country would be impacted by this ruling, by the original ruling by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. So the average premium reduction in 2014 was 76%. So again, if they rule that the federal exchange is a part of the Affordable Care Act that should be struck down, all of a sudden premiums increase significantly. People cannot afford the insurance, especially considering the fact that there's a federal mandate, and if you don't buy from private insurance companies, well, then you're screwed. At the end of the year, when you file your taxes, you're going to pay a penalty for it. Now, thankfully, the 4th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals jumped in, and they said, no, we're going to uphold this part of the Affordable Care Act. And here's what they said. We find that the applicable statutory language is ambiguous and subject to multiple interpretations. Applying deference to the IRS's determination, however, we uphold the rule as a permissible exercise of the agency's discretion. And that was Judge Roger Gregory. And, the Fourth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously agreed that this portion of the Affordable Care Act has nothing wrong with it, and they're going to uphold it, and the federal exchange is constitutional. There's no problem with it whatsoever. In fact, the judge also continued to say, clear that widely available tax credits are essential to fulfilling the Act's primary goals, and the Congress was aware of their importance when drafting the bill. So again, a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but it is likely that this struggle will continue, of course, because the Republicans refuse to let up. They want to go against the Affordable Care Act. They want to strike it down in any way that they can. They want to get it to the Supreme Court, because keep in mind that the Supreme Court is conservative, and there is some likelihood that they will strike down certain portions of the Affordable Care Act, which will then lead to its demise. Now, Judge Roger Gregory makes even more great points in their ruling. He says, furthermore, without an exception to the individual mandate, millions more Americans unable to purchase insurance without the credits would be forced to pay a penalty that Congress never envisioned imposing on them. The IRS rule avoids both these unforeseen and undesirable consequences and thereby advances the true purpose and means of the Act. Okay.
So now, Anna, you went through all of the details of how this all broke down. Now, if you think about it, the only way this can really go disastrous, as we pointed out, the 4 million people that signed up, all of a sudden losing their premiums, certain states with the degree that many people's premiums would go up, you would think, I mean, of course, the states would have to accept this as rejecting the law, basically. They have a chance to reject the law. Now, in a normal world, maybe we could say, why would governors or Republicans and representatives of these states be for their citizens having to deal with this? I mean, they've already signed up. You've lost the battle that you have no alternative for in the first place. So why would you want to do that? In a normal world, we could say, man, these governments would take a hit to really destroy their citizens. But in our world, it's, oh yeah, we'll just screw our citizens over, not represent the people that we were elected to represent, and just blame it on Obama. And they have that much confidence in it that they can blame Obama and say, you see what this law does? Yeah. Because nobody's going to go through the details you just went through to go through all this and figure out and say, hey, this is what the law does, but it needs different levels and hurdles to get through and acceptance from other states for it to work the way it's supposed to, as the last judge said, because Congress intended it that way when they knew it was going through there. So, I mean, I guess if you just look at it from an outside point of view, you think, oh, yeah, why would they try and screw everyone over? Because they can lie to you and tell you that it was someone else's fault. Exactly.
And look, I think the biggest issue for the Republicans right now is that they are in their moment of desperation. And the reason why I say that is because they get no name recognition for this Affordable Care Act, for Obamacare, right? And it's a policy that was thought up, drafted, passed by a Republican in Massachusetts. The Republicans weren't strong enough or smart enough or strategic enough to take on the issue of health insurance in America. So now, all of a sudden, you have all these Americans who have access to insurance when they previously didn't have access to it before. Now, never mind all the flaws of the law. There are certainly many flaws, including the federal mandate, that I'm not necessarily in favor of. But all of a sudden, you have a Democratic president who comes in there and he successfully passes some sort of healthcare reform. And even though it's healthcare reform that Republicans would have been completely in favor of had a Republican president passed it, it doesn't matter. They're going to try to totally dismantle it and try to make it seem as though this is a terrible thing for Americans, even though, as you can see, by the way that this is drafted, it lowers premiums by 76%. That's amazing. Being able to go to the doctor when you have a pre-existing condition, being able to be insured when you have a pre-existing condition, that's another huge thing. There are so many upsides, and more Americans are starting to realize it, which is why I see Republicans changing their wording when it comes to addressing this law. All of a sudden, you don't hear them using Obamacare as much because they don't like him getting the name recognition. They're realizing that more and more people are starting to look at this, and they're starting to see, hey, you know what? There are many upsides to the Affordable Care Act. So now all of a sudden, it's shifting from Obamacare to the Affordable Care Act, and I find it hilarious. And if they want to continue wasting resources in this ridiculous battle, let them have it, let them do it. There is a small chance that it will go to the Supreme Court, and considering how conservative our Supreme Court is, it could be completely repealed, and I'm worried about that. But aside from that, this is a bad political strategy on the Republican part.